Hello, my name is Lynetta Lockhart, and I will be talking about the Scopes trial of 1925. The Scopes trial basically centered around the idea of evolution being taught in the public schools. It began with the ACLU and their desire to discredit ongoing legislation, which basically declared that it was unlawful for anyone, both in universities, normal schools, or public schools, to teach the theory of evolution that went against the divine creation of man as taught by the Bible. So they set out to have a test case where they would choose a teacher who would teach the theory of evolution and see what the final results would be. So Mr. Scopes was a math teacher at Ray County High School in Dayton, Tennessee, and was convinced to apply for and be a part of this test case by George Rapelye. Mr. Rapelye was a mining operator in Dayton, Tennessee, who, through an advertisement by the ACLU, decided that Dayton would be a great place for this event to happen in order to bring attention to Dayton. And so he convinced his friend, Mr. Scopes, to be a part of this test case. Mr. Scopes taught a lesson on the theory of evolution and was immediately arrested. Sue Hicks, a Dayton lawyer, would serve the warrant for Mr. Scopes' arrest, and he would also be the one who would call upon the popular Christian lawyer and politician William Jennings Bryan to be the prosecution. Now, Mr. Bryan, known as the Great Commoner, was against the idea of evolution and felt that these new ideas were hurting the nation's Christian heritage. And so he would serve as prosecutor. The defense attorney, almost polar opposite of Mr. Bryan, was Clarence Darrow, who would be the defense attorney. In his own right, Mr. Darrow was well known, especially for being outspoken and being an atheist and an agnostic. So these two men would square off in this trial and would basically battle against the idea of evolution or the creation of man through the Bible. So the real legal issue was, did Mr. Scopes violate the Butler Act by teaching that man descended from a lower order of animals? But the real issue wasn't his guilt or innocence. I mean, he obviously taught the lesson on evolution. The real issue was, should evolution be taught in the public schools? So, interestingly, Mr. Darrow was very much against Christianity, as you might assume, and honestly, during the trial, would become angry and hostile against the judge, John Ralston, to the point that he was almost cited for for which he was cited for contempt of court. What's interesting is, and honestly, as a Christian, quite encouraging, was the judge, who was a Christian, told Mr. Darrow that he would forgive him, much like Christ forgives us. And so for a sitting judge to openly declare his Christianity and speak of our Savior on the cross, how refreshing, and quite honestly probably doesn't happen much in 2017. Interestingly, Mr. Bryan, in an unprecedented move, decides that he's going to be a witness for the prosecution because of being a staunch Christian and knowing the Bible. However, this backfired, and Mr. Darrow was basically able to, I don't want to say discredit Mr. Bryan, but basically get Mr. Bryan to prove that the Bible can be interpreted in different ways by different people based on the terminology and how we perceive it. So it wasn't a help to the prosecution. Even though the prosecution won their case, because Mr. Scopes was found guilty. He was charged $100, which would later be reversed by the Tennessee Supreme Court. The Butler Act would also be reversed in 1967, and now it is legal to teach the theory of evolution in America.